one of my old buddies used to say, like, if you can wrap a cable, you have a skill that will allow you can buy a house. Like, you can make an income and a living by learning how to wrap cable. Like, yes, the other stuff is important too, like because as a utility, like, that's your big thing is wrapping cable. Like, yes, you still have to learn how to like set up a show, follow instructions, learn like all the different cables, how to run in-out IO panels and all the technology around that. But yeah, if you have a basic skill of like, hey, you can wrap a cable correctly and well and fast, you have a skill that you can, make a living doing.
Come into the light.
Shadow moves in the dark.
Congratulations! World's best cup of coffee.
What is it? Gaff tape.
Well, hey there, and welcome to Coffee and Gaff Tape. We are so excited to welcome you back for episode 4.
Episode 4.
That's right. I'm Nate Anderson here with Daniel Larson.
Hey, what's up, friends? As you know, Coffee and Gaff Tape, this show is designed specifically for those of us in the production world. So if you're hiding in the shadows, rolling the cables, even if you don't know how to roll a cable, do we still let them in?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right, cool. You're in. This show is designed specifically for you.
That's right. And just like we're all from different areas and different walks of life when it comes to production, we are very excited to welcome on David Paulson today, a good friend of mine from Minneapolis. And he actually comes to us from the sports production industry, which is
sports.
Yes. So he was with Minnesota Twins, the Vikings, and even the Minnesota Wild. Go Wild.
How many Stanley Cups have they won?
Yeah, we won't go there.
We definitely should.
The Blackhawks have eliminated the Wild in the playoffs 3 times in the last 5 years.
And what a game he played after missing the third.
Go Hawks.
And he's done a lot of cool things, and one of them, one of the main things that he does at a lot of these sports events is replay, which is really cool. So we're just really excited to get into things with him and learn a little bit about his world.
All right, let's do it.
We are so grateful, again, to have David Paulson with us. David's an awesome friend of mine and just a really great guy, and I think he's going to provide a lot of insight for us today. So, David, first question that we have for you, who is David Paulson?
Well, first of all, that's me. I've been just a guy that grew up in Minnesota, worked... I don't know. I went to school, didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. Did a little bit of, originally went into school as a computer science major and realized that I couldn't pass calculus and that was going to be a problem. So then I ended up double majoring in media communication and youth ministry while playing baseball and football at the same time. So I was very busy in college. And then after college, my senior year, I got an internship at North Metro TV up in Blaine, and we just did high school sports productions. I had no idea what I was getting myself into, but I've met a lot of really cool people and started thinking, hey, this is kind of fun. Not making a lot of money, but I started doing more and more video production. Expanded all over the place, did more and more sports, did, some church stuff, did some music events. So it's developed into now I freelance. I moved to LA just over 2 years ago now. Up in Minnesota, I did a lot of Fox broadcasts. So I did a lot of Twins games and Twins and Timberwolves were the two I did the most of, but I did some Vikings and Wild games up there as well. I do college football shows in the fall, so I've been traveling every weekend, and that's mostly what I do now with ESPN. And then they have me just do whatever events they need to now. Working and trying to get in some of the local scene out here in LA right now. I'm just a name on the list right now, so that's kind of that's a hard transition. But so I'm mostly doing a lot of traveling shows. But the whole sports industry is changing, as I'm sure we'll probably discuss later in here. But the whole production and live events and on-site production and technicians is changing very quickly. It was on that way already, and now with COVID happening, it's definitely accelerated some of the plans of some of these companies. So the whole industry is changing right now. Like, I literally flew to New York the day that they canceled like everything. Like, they shut down all the basketball tournament. Like, I didn't know I was in the air. I was flying from LA to JFK, and by the time I landed like at 10 p.m. at night, I got like 10 emails like, hey, like don't travel today, blah, 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 blah. Like, oh, everything's canceled. And like, well, I'm already here. Like, my hotel and stuff was canceled. So I like, obviously like the only flight back to LA was leaving in like 10 minutes. I couldn't get on it. So I had to spend the night, spend like 6 hours there, jump on a plane and fly back the next morning. But then I was unemployed for 3 months, and it's like I didn't know what to do. Like no sports were going on. Yeah. Then randomly, I got a call from I got a Bristol phone number. I'm like, I probably should answer this. Probably ESPN. I'm like, I haven't talked to anyone about anything. And they're like, hey, like, are you? As beginning of June, they're like, hey, are you available June 6th? I'm like, yeah, I can do through August 1st. I was like, what did you just say? June 6th through August 1st? Like, yeah, we're doing this, I'd never even heard of this at the time, but it was a bubble. They're doing a boxing bubble in Las Vegas. Like, yeah, you're just going to go and you're going to live in a hotel room and pretty much it. You don't have any contact with anyone, but you'll be working. Gosh. And it's like, you'll guarantee you 40 hours a week and you'll just be there for like 2 months. And it's like, okay, like let me just figure, like I have to figure out a bunch of logistical stuff. But yeah, so I ended up doing this. I lived in the MGM Grand for 2 months in this boxing bubble. This was the craziest, weirdest, different experiences ever. We had the TV truck there. We did 2 productions a week. We boxed Tuesday night and Thursday night and had set days Mondays and Wednesdays. And then we just lived there. Like we couldn't go on the casino floor, or like we couldn't go anywhere. Like we just had like, they fed us 3 meals a day. It was kind of like going to like a college, like dorm, like style living. Like it's so weird.
Right. You never leave the MGM.
Yeah. You never leave.
Wow.
But that was a different experience. So that was, that then transitioned right into football then, but
yeah,
right. It was just bizarre. It was just different. Never would have thought that in years past. So,
yeah.
So really, really quick, you mentioned that you moved from Minnesota to California. Was that, and you said 2 years ago, was that mainly because of like the changes in the sports broadcasting scene there, and there was just more opportunity in California? Like, what was the reasoning behind?
Partially, there was tons of reasons. One of the reasons was kind of along with that, like, yeah, there's more teams and more different networks to work out here. Whereas in Minnesota, you have one network to work for. So a lot more opportunities out here just because, you've got 2 baseball teams, 2 football teams, basketball teams, hockey teams, and more networks to work for. And obviously weather is great.
What was it that like captured your heart about being in the shadows of live production and specifically sports production?
Well, I was a big sports fan. So when I got that first internship, I was like, hey, this is kind of fun. Like I've always, even at Bethel, like doing a couple of the video production classes, like I was like, yeah, I kind of like this. This is kind of fun. Back then I kind of had my eye like, hey, like it'd be kind of fun to do like movies and et cetera. But when I started a taste of doing sports, like, hey, like this is kind of fun. Like I've always been an athlete. I played multiple sports. And to get a taste of that, like, hey, this is what I actually like really enjoy doing. So that kind of captured my eye. And once I figured out that I could make a living and make some okay money doing it, it's like, hey, I can make a living and I can get paid to watch sports. So, nice. And so that's kind of cool. And then there's obviously there's still a creative side to it. Like there is some technical skills, but there's some creativity into it too. Like how do you tell stories? How do you show this? Like how can you input your voice and your vision into this production? And sometimes you can do some kind of cool things. Man,
I love the thought of that because that's something that we talk about a lot is, storytelling. How do you tell a story with production? How do you do it with what you do? But even with sports and especially with replay, there's an element of that, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. With all of visual media, it's all about how do you tell a story. Like if in a football game, something happens, if there's a turnover, a lot of times we'll go to break, then we'll try to tell a story real quick. We'll show, hey, here's a replay of that fumble, that recovery, and now here's a replay of the touchdown. You only have 10 seconds, but how can you kind of rehash that story really quick and be like, hey, here's the cause, here's the effect, here's what happened. Now you come back from break and you can kind of, hey, like here's how do you now respond to like, hey, we saw that turnover. This team capitalized on it. Now how does this other team respond? Or does the other team continue to pile on? Like it's all about stories.
Yeah.
That's amazing. So actually this just whole world fascinates me because I grew up watching sports, huge sports fan. And like, tell me about like the biggest challenge when it comes to, specifically maybe replay. What's the intensity level like inside of that truck or room where it's like, okay, we've got X amount of time to craft a story. Maybe like walk us through like what that looks like.
Okay. Yeah, it varies on show to show, and it varies in what type of element you're talking about too. So we'll just kind of go over like a typical day for us. And every show is different too. Football shows tend to be a little bit more intense. It's a higher viewed and higher rating type games, usually more money spent on it. Usually that means more heads, executives, coordinating producers, more people, more eyes that want their voice and say and have their inputs, even if they don't know what they're talking about. But that never happens. Yeah, like literally, it's kind of funny listening to sometimes like they'll be texting the directors and producers and stuff during the game. If you do a little basketball show, they don't really care. They kind of just like go like, hey, we'll let you guys go do your Timberwolves game or your college basketball game, or there's just not as much oversight as when you start stepping up to the bigger, higher events. Then you have just more eyes and feedback, and sometimes it can be a little bit more intense. Typically for these shows, we'll show up roughly 6 hours before the event starts. All the camera guys everything will be loaded up in a semi-trailer. All that stuff, the camera guys will go build their cameras. As editors and replay people, we'll go into the truck and we'll get hard drives with all the footage, with all the archives and stuff. And we'll get a list from our producers saying, hey, here's the stories we're going to tell today. For a Twins game, we'll get a list of like, here are the 6 or 7 things, the packages, or maybe 8 or not, whatever. Here's all the packages we need to build today. We need to find, depending on the opponent we're playing, historic significance, we'll go and build all these 20 seconds roughly. Sometimes as things get quicker and quicker, they kind of get shorter and shorter. It's like, hey, now we need 17-second packages. Now we need 15 seconds. Like, how can you tell a story? And you just find B-roll essentially for these things, and we'll go and we'll pre-produce them then. So we'll spend 2 or 3 hours building these packages. Then we'll go through a pre-production phase where we'll go and put graphics on them and sound or music, whatnot. So those will be ready for the game. So those will be ready for at a moment's notice. Then after that, the pregame producers will come in and be like, all right, hey, we need to like 3 or 4 more elements for our pregame show. I guess this is kind of specifically for Fox. ESPN doesn't typically have a pregame show that you're working for. So yeah, all those things get ready to go, and they'll be, as the game goes on, as the situations arise, the producer can call out like, hey, give me the package of whatever, like, hey, this guy has been hot the last 3 games. Here's roll his package over his last 3 games with the statistics and video of the last 3 games, or he's on a 20-game hit streak, or this guy's setting records. So we'll do that during the game. The intensity will change a little bit for a replay sequence. In a basketball game, someone makes a really big slam dunk. You can't show the replay right away because it's still live play. So you'll get all the looks lined up. And so I'll be talking with the producer, and he'll be asking too, like, hey, like my look's really good. I've got the handheld underneath the basket. It's a pretty good look. Someone else will be like, hey, I've got another good look of it from a camera up top. And we'll just be communicating to like what we go. So as soon as that ball goes out of bounds, there's a timeout, we can go back and rehash that play that just happened. So but usually when you do stuff like that and all of a sudden a big play, like usually it's a big play to stoppage too. So all of a sudden they'll be like, hey, all right, forget the slam dunk. We need what just happened. And so sometimes it can be really quick. Different directors and producers have different intensities. There's some guys that are very good at communicating, and those go much smoother. You have some guys that just freak out and they're yelling at everyone. They want 15 things at once. And sometimes the pace of the game can really change all that too. So it just varies. Like I've been all over the place. The biggest thing is the best communicators, and makes a big difference. And I don't know if you guys know, but the Twins director, I don't know if he still is anymore because they sold companies, but Matt Gangle, he is now the Fox big time director. So he does the World Series and the All-Star game. He used to be the Wild director and the Twins director, but he's kind of done more and more national shows now. Makes a lot more money doing that. So, but his thing when I talked to him, when he was kind of stepping up his game, he told me that like the best way, like what he learned, what he needed to do was be very efficient with his communication and as few as words as possible. So instead of trying to give this whole big, because he's talking, the producer's talking, other people, so you're listening to so many different heads and voices that are important, but how can you be very concise? That's the thing. You got to be concise, describe what you want with as many people as you can, but as few words as possible, because other people have to communicate too. And I've ran into the opposite thing in some of these other shows now too, where the director and producers are like, the words per minute are insane, and just be able to like just try to pick out like what you need to hear, and the information you need is like they're talking over each other and they're talking so fast that it's like, all right, you guys, less is more in this instance.
What's like the typical team structure of a production team for sports events with the director and TD and replay? Like, how many people are typically involved in something like that? And
how does that split between like local and then, you know, if they're going to fly someone in for a national broadcast, like where do you guys like, you know, pick up, and then where does the national team kind of take over?
Yeah, those are two great questions. So the productions stuff is usually split into the production team. So you have like usually the director, producer, depending on what network and what show it is, they'll usually be staffed by, you know, Fox, ESPN, CBS, whatever. They'll be working for them usually. Sometimes they're freelance and they'll work for whoever, but for the most time, so those guys are kind of the production team. And then usually like local hires are, you know, TD, the audio, which is they call the A1. They'll have A2s, the audio assist guys. They'll go. They're the ones actually running out in the field, placing the microphones on people, running all the cables, doing the interconnects. The A1's going to be the mixing and setting up the truck and patching everything. There's a video guy. He's the one patching all the cameras in. He's one that does all the shading. He's in charge of the video department, which then has all the camera guys. Camera guys will have utilities running their cables and wrapping cables for them. The replay room would be the replay guys, editors. I think that's mostly everyone. And then you have your talent too. And the talent is usually also part of the, they're with the production staff or whatever. They're usually staff people. So all those guys kind of work together for one of these local shows. Usually everyone's local. So usually for your regional broadcast, if your Wild game, your Blackhawks game,
go Blackhawks.
Hey, they had their run. Their run.
It's over now.
It is over. It is.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a Wild's turn now. We'll see.
Maybe.
Yeah. So for these regional broadcasts, you usually have two shows. There'll be the home show and the visit show. And before COVID, the visit show would actually travel with the team. So like I'd travel with the Twins and I'd go and do their show on the road in places. And so we'd travel like a director, a producer, our talent would be there. So play-by-play, color, sideline reporter, then an editor. So I'd be having all of our video files, and that was really, and a graphic person. The graphic person would travel too. So that'd be kind of our traveling. And so we'd go to a market, we'd go to Chicago or wherever, and we would get the rest of the crew would be filled out by local hires. And they did this thing about when I got started in the business. They used to have their own TV truck for each show. They then figured out a way they could share resources and they could use less people. So unfortunately made it harder to get jobs. So they'd do these, they'd share trucks essentially. So the visit show would have 3 camera guys and they'd share. So like a basketball game, you'd have your own handheld guy, your whole own like high camera and slash camera. And then you'd share like the game camera shoots the same. So like the philosophy behind that was like, why do we want 2 game cameras shooting the exact same thing? And they're not going to do anything crazy. We'll just have one and we'll share that feed. Now the home show has control of it. So there's this weird give and take of like how much the shared cameras, you don't want them doing crazy things. They're going to do kind of a standard thing kind of around the country. So that's kind of how that whole thing worked. Now with COVID, they're doing more control room type stuff. So those guys aren't necessarily we used to travel with the teams, which was kind of a cool experience to travel on the charters and whatnot. Now with the internet speeds getting better, unfortunately, the bandwidth is well enough that people are doing, instead of traveling, they're staying in their home studios now. I don't know how that will change after the pandemic stuff is fixed, but part of that was local teams and had put rules in place, like how many people could be in the stadium and how many, which is kind of silly for production staff wise, because they're not really in the stadium, or they're like, you have like one camera guy out in the center field all by himself, and that counts as a person. Like, there's no one within 300 feet of him, but okay. So that's kind of changed a little bit. So people are doing productions of studios now. The national broadcast now, depending on what show it is. So for like first round of basketball or hockey playoffs, all usually aren't exclusives. So there'll be your regional teams, so both regional. So while they're playing the Blackhawks, both would have their home shows there. They'd have two shows, and a national could, like NBC Sports, could come in and they'd be a third show, and then they could bring in a Canadian show too. So there could be 4 or 5 shows at once. The national shows, depends what their budget is. Sometimes they'll hire a lot of local people too. Like they'll send a director, producer, and an entire bunch of locals. For some time, from the bigger national shows too, they'll travel a bunch. Like they might travel, like, hey, we got 4 camera guys. They'll travel a TD. They might have 3 replay people and editors. They might have an audio guy. They travel. So they might just travel more people. They'll usually before COVID, they used to hire a bunch of local people down too. But for this last year, which was kind of nice for us, like our whole ESPN college football crew, we traveled everyone because they wanted to have it. They had strict testing protocol, blah, 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 et cetera. So, which was kind of nice, because sometimes some of those little college towns where you get local people out of it's not very deep, and it's usually more of a struggle, at least especially in the replay department. It's tougher to find people that are technically savvy. Camera people are a little bit easier. They kind of think camera people are a dime a dozen. Everyone wants to run camera. Those are easy to find, but some of the more specific positions, like audio guys, will get traveled a lot more, just because there's very limited amount of audio mixers in the country that can know how to run and set up a show like this. So there's the audio guy in Minnesota is really good. He travels all over the place just because there's such high demand. Whereas camera guys, you can kind of find a camera guy anywhere. They still will travel really good ones around for the big shows, but it's harder to travel as a camera. Replay guys you can find them sometimes, but yeah, like editors will get traveled quite a bit. So.
What is the craziest, /biggest sporting event that you've gotten to do personally?
Craziest, biggest. Well, like the Super Bowl is kind of crazy and big.
I think that counts.
That does. Yeah, I think that counts.
It does, but like there's so many little shows around it that, like, you're not necessarily doing like the Super Bowl. I mean, because everyone that has a show, like the Food Network comes up here, every every news station comes up here and has a studio. Like there's so many stupid little shows that it's like, well, I did a bunch of stuff for like NFL Network. I did a bunch of show. Actually won this. I
was going to say, just a little bling on your back table.
Nice.
There.
Yeah, this is we won an Emmy for doing stuff for the NFL Network for the Super Bowl.
Man, that's got some weight to it.
Yeah, it's
holy cow.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, like, it looks kind of small, but it's not. It's heavy. It's a big guy. It's heavy. Yeah, there's so many stupid little shows that you're like, well, I didn't necessarily work on the Super Bowl, but I did 3 or 4 different shows for the NFL Network. We're doing red carpet shows for them for their awards shows. We did this one, I think, was for their media day when we were at the Xcel Energy Center. We had stuff all over the place. I think it was a camera for that, which is kind of weird because I never run camera, but yeah, that was good. Last year, not this year they didn't have it, but I did the Pro Bowl last year down in Orlando. And that was actually really just crazy how big that was. Like all of ESPN's trucks were down there. We had so many trucks. I think we had like 12 or 14 replay guys in the truck. Like I had like one replay make air just because, I don't know. It was just kind of interesting to see how big that production was for like this event. And then also like we did the All-Star game in Minnesota too. My gosh, that was like 6 or 7 years ago now already, but that was a big event too. Like same thing. They had little shows all over the place. Yeah, I don't know. Just a bunch of different shows like that. When it gets crazier, it kind of shows all over the place.
Right.
That's awesome. This is backtracking a little bit, and I think maybe you already touched on this a little bit too. But why replay? What interested you about replay over camera or any of the other roles?
I like doing camera. I like doing, especially like football. I love doing football. I love running a handheld on the sideline, being great there near the action. But it is kind of nice to be kind of on the production side of things. It's fun for me, at least, to be able to have access to all the different cameras, all the different angles, and just see all the different resources right there. Everything's networked together, so you can kind of go ahead and if you want to go and review a play yourself, you kind of can. You can go roll back and be like, oh, okay, that was, you can see if the ref got it right or wrong, or see the great play, and then if you can't tell, it's kind of fun to go see different angles.
Yeah.
And be like, so you get to kind of watch the show yourself in kind of your own unique angle, which is kind of fun. Also, you're out of the elements. So if you're doing these outdoor sporting events, like weather can be an issue. Done enough cold weather and rainy games, it's kind of nice to be kind of protected from that.
Yeah.
So just kind of being on the production side of it, I kind of enjoyed that too.
You have the ultimate DVR.
Yes, exactly.
Camera. You were talking a little bit before we started recording about like the gear that's involved. Like, can you tell us a little bit about that? That was surprising.
Yeah. So the replay system that we use as a video server, the one that most live TV events use is this thing called an EVS, and you'd expect to be like this really high tech, flashy thing. It is very high tech, but it's not flashy. It's run on DOS actually, which
nice.
So it's fantastic for us, the old school computer guys. That you actually have to go in there and type, to start up Windows or whatever back in the day, doing your command prompt. So it's very low graphic interface, which is great. So it doesn't run on a GUI for your tech savvy people, your graphical user interface, which means it's faster. Instead of all the time processing the graphics, you can go through tons and tons of video clips. All the video clips you can write as a name, otherwise it'll be the time code of when you made that video clip. You can scroll through hundreds and thousands of video clips, whatever is loaded onto your server. Everything's networked together. You can go through all these things almost instantaneously because there's no graphics to load. Wow. It's super fast. There are some other systems that do have some graphics, and even EVS has a new tablet thing that has a little bit more, unfortunately has more graphics, and it's so much slower. Like they have some stuff that's touch screen, and just like a touch screen, you touch it and you have to wait. And so if you have to go through 3 or 4 or 5 different pages, you have to wait for like 2 or 3 seconds for each page to load one at a time. It's really frustrating for guys that have been in the industry for a long time. They're used to just, hitting alts over and just going, and they're over there. Did you do that on the graphic system? It's boom.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my gosh, get there. The producer's yelling at me to have this video clip up now. So
you're actually using commands to trigger playbacks and define things, right?
You can.
Wow.
Yeah. They have these little controllers with a little jog wheel and a T-bar and a play, stop,
Sure.
But then to actually scroll through your server, you have a little keyboard, so you can use your arrow keys, go left and right, and if you hold Alt and left and right, you'll go over by pages instead of just by being page up, page down. Yeah, so you're flying through all these video clips very quickly, so you have a whole big page, and so what we'll do for a lot of sports, especially like baseball, we'll do one whole page will be one game. So game 1 will be on page 1, game 2, page 2, and so you can have all these games. So if you have a big long homestand, like, oh hey, remember that thing that happened 3 games ago? You can hopefully go back and be able to access that very quickly.
Right.
So I imagine you have to be really good about meta tagging a lot of things, right?
You just they do have a meta tagging thing that's not really implemented very much.
Sure.
NFL has a little bit more with that, but usually like what we did would have a standard labeling system. So you have a whatever it is. For Fox would do like the first 4 letters of the guy's last name, and then something about like what they did. So if you have an idea of when it happened, you can go back and find it. Whereas, and then also like what you have to do when you're the editor or replay guys, you have to archive all this stuff. So you're saving all of it for later too. So you'll have it onto a hard drive, and you can plug that into this thing called an X file, which is also made by EVS. And you can search that type of data then. So you can search like, hey, like we want to look at, I can load like multiple hard drives of the full season of baseball. Like, hey, I want to look, trying to think of a Twins player right now, but back like when Brian Dozier played for the team, like we want to look at all of his home runs. You can pull and it'll have all of them, time coded or dates. So you're like, hey, we want to look at his home runs in the last 2 weeks, or maybe against a specific team. So you put those dates in as home runs or doubles or whatever. So you start searching with those. However you have if you have a standard labelizing system, makes it so much easier to go through, thousands and thousands of files and games.
Wow. So it sounds like in the replay world, time is of the essence. Like you've got seconds to pull together clips.
Yep.
Where time is involved and time constraints, there's probably room for some mistakes. Mm-hmm. What would you say was your most embarrassing mistake in the replay booth? Unless you've never made a mistake. I mean, that's
no. Any live production, there's always mistakes. You get to the point where you don't make many mistakes, or the ones you do are usually little, and usually the viewer at home won't even notice. But you do, you're like, oh my gosh, it feels like I had a frozen image up on the screen forever. There's a couple standard mistakes that like every replay guy has always made. There's like just how things are configured. Like, I don't know what my most embarrassing one would be.
Okay.
Rolling, like, let's say like ones that you've done before, like you accidentally roll a wrong play. Just like if a football happens and you get confused if they want, the last player, the play before it or whatnot. And sometimes you'll roll. It's happened where there's just a miscommunication, or you thought you had the last play and it's really the play before because they're very similar. And all of a sudden they're like, that's not it. That's the wrong play. And you're like, wait, what? So
I imagine it's all pretty like typical stuff. Like everybody does
yeah.
that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What's when you and I worked together, it was more in the live event space, mm-hmm. and a lot of our viewers and listeners, I think, are in that, whether it's live events or church services or whatever it is. But obviously, I think there's first of all, probably a huge difference in intensity. But like, what's the difference? Would you say what's the difference in doing sports events versus typical live events?
I mean, it depends what live production too.
Yeah.
Because I would say there are some live productions where you spend a lot of time rehearsing, depending on some of your shows. Sometimes you just have lots of rehearsals and you're doing a lot of stuff over and over again. Some of the live event stuff can be a little bit more scripted. I mean, it's all how you your perspective want to look at things, because sports too, you can kind of script out when your quarter breaks are and when breaks, and you kind of have an idea of the format and flow of the game, mm-hmm. but the actual game coverage can be all over the place. The pre-production of sporting events, depending on your network and what you have, is just a little bit different. I'm just kind of thinking how funny it would be. So a lot of times, like during football, we'll have to find players warming up, and that's always, I guess, in every sport they want to have cameras and looks of guys warming up just in case they get hurt. Or what we'll do for ESPN is we'll send like, hey, we want to highlight this. We're going to send it to College Game Day, the show, and so we'll highlight these things and we'll transmit that video for them so they can play back for their show. I just think that'd be kind of funny to do for church services or it's a live thing. Like, hey, we're going to ISO the pastor. Here's him warming up, getting ready to go.
Exactly.
Have the walk-in shot, driving on the bus, driving in the car, walking into the, like all those stuff that we do that we think is stupid.
Some sound guys already do that with the pastors in the bathroom beforehand. And
oh man. Or like flashback to the sermon from last week. Last week he talked about.
There you go. That's awesome. We talked about this a little bit towards the beginning, but obviously, I think everybody in the industry in various different ways has been affected by COVID and affected by the pandemic, whether that's live entertainments, whether that's live events, whether that's sports. It's been challenging for a lot of people. We also know that some new opportunities have come out of it as well, and just a lot of different changes. How has it affected what you do?
Well, it's really changed a lot of things. A lot of productions, like I touched on a little bit, their ultimate goal for a long time has always been, how can we do big and as wonderful of a show and as possible with as few people and as little money as possible. News stations have been a great example of that, where they literally, everything's robotic now. It's pretty much one or two people running the entire show with it's just a push of a button. There's no camera operators anymore. Everything's robotics. Everything's pre-programmed in. It's just, everything's done that way. They want to do similar things in the sporting world. And it's always been, hey, like how can we get fewer and fewer? We want to do the show with fewer camera people, but we still want it to look good. And there would be guys that would try to be really aggressive with their cameras to try to make a 5 or 6 camera show look like it's got 8, 9, 10 cameras. And so that's been a thing. They've always wanted to truncate these shows. COVID has given them a really good excuse for that. And they're like, oh, we only can have X amount of people in a stadium, or have fewer replay people. So now, like I said, they're trying to do more and more stuff remotely. A lot more of networks have gone to these shows, and a thing called Big Ten Network calls them like these micro shows, and ESPN will call them Remy's. And essentially what that means is they don't even send people to a stadium anymore. They'll have like a little package or truck or whatnot go with a handful of cameras, and they'll plug them in, a couple of audio things, and then they'll run everything else remotely back in Bristol or whatnot in these little studios. And they'll have their director, producer, their replays will be run there. Essentially with the bandwidth now, they'll just remote the stations at the stadium. So everything will be there, but they'll run them remotely. So just have the controller and the commands there. So it obviously saves, you don't have travel for these people. You don't have hotels for them. And you can hire them at a studio rate as opposed to a freelance rate. So COVID has really affected that's really truncated. It's really sped up that time. Like everyone knew that was coming, but now it's gotten a little bit more intense. For example, our college football show this year, ESPN used to have like 12 or 13 different college football shows they'd travel around. They'd still do, and about 2 or 3 years ago, maybe it was before that, they started doing these micro shows for football, for some of the little ones they didn't really care about. They'd do, put them on ESPN3 so you could watch them on their app. This last year with COVID, they took all of those 12 crews or whatever they had, and they made them 4. We only had 4 football crews this year. And fortunately, it was huge. So like a lot of people also were just like, that's a time of because summer in the sporting world is slow, just because there's only baseball. There's no other sports. And obviously baseball is kind of weird this year too with it. But once you get to the fall, you got basketball, hockey, college sports. There's a lot more productions going on. And then college football. So college football is a time when a lot of guys would kind of get back on their feet after a slow summer. So it was kind of a bummer to see all these shows go away. But fortunately, the producer I've worked for the last 2 years, he got to do a show and he requested me, which was nice. So we, like I said earlier, we traveled our entire crew, whereas before we would have, 2 editors would travel with the team, and then we'd get 2 local guys with us. This year we traveled 4. All 4 of us traveled. So it made us a better show because there wasn't a question every week of what type of talent level you're getting. So everyone, that was actually really nice. It obviously cost them a little bit more money. And then with our COVID testing and protocols that have kind of evolved as the year went on. There's stuff that all changed. We also got another truck too. So just to spread people out, cramming everyone into one or two trucks. It'd be one truck for little shows, and for football, it used to be two trucks. They added a third one this year just to spread people out, to give more distance for everyone to keep everyone safe and healthy. So yeah, those are all changes that we saw this year. How much that stuff's going to continue, I don't know. That's the talk everyone's been trying to figure out. It seems like, we found a lot of the guys too that I work with would do Sunday Night Baseball with ESPN. And a lot of their baseball stuff's going away. They're not traveling anyone. Like, those jobs are just gone. So it's a very interesting time in the industry. Like, everyone's trying to figure out like what we're going to keep doing. Like, there are going to be opportunities, but it's more and more of it seems to be like they want to do more stuff remotely from studios, and obviously with budget constraints, and if they can get college kids to do stuff for cheaper, and it's a very interesting time right now. It's really changing.
Yeah. Are there any new opportunities or new things opening up? Obviously, I think we're all excited to be able to, as fans, be able to go back into stadiums.
100%.
Are there things as we continue to start to open up again that you're seeing? Maybe even if it looks different for people as production world, are there opportunities in sports that maybe didn't exist before?
I say there's always new technologies and new things, and people wanting to try things. It's the challenge always is who can you get to pay for it? Like my brother does. He does some work for Sony. I think it's Sony. They're the ones that have the 360 cameras in a lot of the stadiums. And so he does it there at US Bank Stadium. And then he traveled with Fox. Yeah, he was supposed to be CBS, but it changed. So he traveled with the Fox, one of their shows this last year. And well, I guess he did do the CBS thing. He made it all the way to the Kansas City game and then AFC Championship game. That's as far as he did. He was supposed to originally do the Super Bowl, but they do that 360 camera, and so they have some package then that they get to. They go and they pick a play, and then he has to go and do this whole little thing, and then he sends it to the TV truck, and they put it into a package, and it's sponsored element. There are new technologies and new things like this. And a couple of years ago, one of the new things was the goal line cameras that a lot of the bigger football shows have. Now and you'll see it anytime you watch a big football game, they'll love to use that thing because they spend so much money on it, and it's such a limited use that they'll use that replay all the time. So there's lots of these technologies and things out there, but the smaller shows just don't have the budget or the need to, like, hey, we're doing a little 6-camera show. We're not going to spend the money to do these pylon cameras, and then we have to have a special replay system to record all these things. And before you know it, even something as simple as like a Skycam for a football game, I think that costs roughly like $50,000 for a game to like run, to have all the operators and the gear. And it's like, man, that's for just one camera, that's $50,000 right there. So like, there's more opportunities, and there's lots of cool things out there. It's just hard to find, even those companies. Like, I know a couple of guys that do a bunch of just random little things that do a lot of really cool stuff. It's just hard for the companies to be like, hey, like, we have enough work for you to give you a consistent work basis, because these really cool technologies, like these shows, just don't have the budget for them. So it's, that question though is the thing that everyone in the industry is asking, is like, what new things are there with everything trying to get smaller and cheaper, and everyone wants to do the little remote production type things? Like, is there still a place for, so like, can you still make a living doing this? That's the question.
Sure. Yeah, it's good. To kind of stay on the same note, but just in a different way. Sure. For somebody who's just starting out, who maybe they have a passion for live production, they have a passion for sports, they really want to get into live sports. What would you tell them?
Get as much experience as you can. Obviously, like, I went to college for it. You don't need to go to college for this. The path that I took, I think a lot of people can follow. is like I said, obviously, like if church, like when I was in high school, like I did some stuff for my church. And, I ran just the audio and camera is super basic, like just a camera in the back. Learn as much as you can. Then if you're in places that have a community television, like a North Metro in Blaine, like they take volunteers for their sporting events. Go there and learn as much as you can. Like they'll let you there. You can get hands-on experience. Like they'll let you run cameras. You can learn how do audio stuff. You can run replays. If you get to point, they'll even like let you direct shows, and you can learn so much. And as your experience grows, there's more and more places to keep expanding that. I think was it CCX TV is the one that does some, and yeah, there's a bunch of these little community stations. Look those up and get in there, start doing sports productions. Those guys that do that usually are like on the fringe of doing like freelance stuff. And so you'll start making contacts of people to do that. Obviously in any industry, it's all who you know. Yeah. It's who you know and what you know. So yeah, my whole philosophy was I want to learn as much as I can in those places to make me better. I want to learn all the positions. Like I didn't want hey, I just want to be a really good camera. There's people just like, I just want to be a camera guy. Well, you're really limiting yourself. Sure, you might be an okay camera guy, but you know what's going to make you a better camera guy is if you have worked in the replay room too, and hey, I know what those guys are looking for. Do some audio stuff so you can just when you're shooting stuff, you're like, I can have in the back of my head I need to do different things for audio. And yeah, having a well-rounded I feel like it's made me better as doing camera stuff. I feel like it's maybe a better replay person because I know what camera people are looking for, and inversely as well. So learn all these things. Like my career path, I did North Metro, and then I did some camera work for Running Aces, doing shooting horse races, and then I was doing CTN, which they did St. Paul Saints baseball games, and then they did a bunch of Coon Rapids sports, and they had a lot of guys that did stuff professionally, and that's how I got into hey, and then I started doing some professional stuff, being a utility and being a runner. And then after doing, that for 6 or 7 years, and then all of a sudden you get some opportunities to do camera, and they're like, you can do this. You'll be on our camera list. And then finally getting opportunities to do replays and editing. And it's learn as much as you can. If there's one skill though, if you had to just learn one thing, it's learn how to wrap cable. If you know how it's kind of funny because I talked to another guy that went to Bethel that's teaching a class. I can't remember what school. He teaches in Minnesota now, and we did one of these a month or two ago. And it's kind of funny because it's like, hey, do you guys know? Do you know how to over under? And he's just like, no. I'm like, well, you need to learn how to over under cable. If you do, one of my old buddies used to say, if you can wrap a cable, you have a skill that will allow you can buy a house. You can make an income and a living by learning how to wrap cable. Yes, the other stuff is important too. Because as a utility, that's your big thing is wrapping cable. Yes, you still have to learn how to set up a show, follow instructions, learn all the different cables, how to run in out IO panels and all the technology around that. But yeah, if you have a basic skill of hey, you can wrap a cable correctly and well and fast, you have a skill that you can make a living doing.
Let me tell you, David, you're speaking our language. That's a recurring theme on the show.
Yes, it is. Because this show is for the people that wrap cables day in and day out. And so you're preaching to the choir. Well done.
Good.
Well done.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so we always say that gear is great. Knowing how to do something, having a skill is amazing. But it's really at the heart, at the heart level, why do you do what you do? What gets you up out of bed in the morning to go back into the shadows and do what you do?
Well, I love both these things. Obviously everyone knows the saying, if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life. And most of these guys that are in sports production, there are some hard days and there's whole different types of productions that you're doing. But at the end of the day, it's, you're telling a story, you're watching a sport that usually you love. As you do more and more sports, you start doing so many different shows and sports that you're like, I don't even know the rules of this game. Sometimes it helps. That's what's helped me become better, like playing baseball and football. I know the games very well. It's made me better at my crafts. But like I get to watch a sport and watch games that I love, and I get to do production for it. And I really love the production too. So it's kind of to me, it's the best of both worlds. Like I get to do both. And I've ventured into other productions, and I've been working more and more different things now since moving to LA, trying to venture into more. I mean, we've kind of touched on it, but everything's changing. Like, so like you guys and like the company you're doing, like more people are doing, there's more esports stuff. There's more different productions. One of the things I've noticed too, I mean, I don't know how many people out there, but there are people that think like, editors are the next really big thing. Like people with like YouTube money is huge out there now, and their CPMs are just crazy. So like, yeah. So like, I don't know, these are just all the things I love. I feel like as a production person, you just have your fingers just in so many just different things that like that's big too. Is like, you need to, I think most people here already realize this, but you have to diversify. Like you just have to, like, you can't just be like, hey, I just do this one thing. In productions change all the time, as COVID has shown. There's not, like everyone always thought like, well, hey, like, well, we always need camera guys there. And but I mean, I just did what show I was doing the women's SEC championship this last week for a basketball tournament in South Carolina. And with COVID restrictions, we have no camera guys on the court. Like all the handhelds, they had robotic cameras down there. And that was something that was everyone's fear, 15 years ago when I got into the industry, like, oh, they're going to put robotic cameras in everywhere. And it was the conspiracy theory that all the camera guys had. And well, now they're starting to do it a little bit, and they could run those remotely, through IP and so I don't know. I feel like I touched on a bunch of different things with that question, but like I would say I love production and I love sports, and hopefully I can continue to do what I do. But like I said, I'm doing lots of other things now too. So
yeah. All right. So David, that is all the time we have for this conversation. We are so incredibly thankful that you spent this time with us, and I think it's been super insightful. I know for me, especially being a sports fan, and it's just really, really cool to kind of see the behind the scenes of, how the stuff that we enjoy ends up on the screen, and so really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. I always enjoy sharing some of my experiences and knowledge, and absolutely, that's fun.
Man, that was super interesting.
Yeah. I love, we always say I love whenever we can find somebody who just like bleeds and loves what they do, and it shows. That's who we want to talk to, and I think David shows that, so it's cool. I know our audience is from probably all walks of life in different areas, and does different things for work, probably mostly involving production, but we all come at it from different approaches, but a lot of the times it's the same heart, the same struggle, the same things that we're dealing with.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, two things for sure stood out to me. One, make sure you know how to wrap a cable. That is a skill, and David, so eloquently said that, like, that's a skill, and that can buy you a house someday. So very, very important. The other thing that I thought was super interesting was just the different dynamics between people on a production, people on a show like that in the sports world, and how really you've got so many different people coming from different walks of life, whether they're local, whether they're national, and just coming together to really like build out that show. And it's really, really, really fascinating, especially as a sports fan. Growing up watching, a million Bears losses because that's what the Bears do. Yeah. But yeah, absolutely. Super fun.
Well, and I think just that multifaceted aspect too, and that's something that we're hearing, especially right now. How do we be diversified in different areas. And I think that's just good in general, even if it's not, even if you're not a freelancer and you're not, doing a bunch of different skills and a bunch of different types of work. It's how do I learn enough skills? Because even if it's just, something very simple, likely you're going to take something from that and be able to apply it into another area of whatever you're doing to improve that and improve your experience. Every little bit helps, and it's just the wax on, wax off type of mentality.
Very nice.
Went a little karate kid there.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, I know for sure. I'll never forget just on that multifaceted kind of multi-skilled level. Like I remember talking to an audio engineer at our church, and he said, like, I'm not going to know everything about playing drums, but like I want to be able to know enough that like I can talk to the drummer in a way that he's going to understand. Right. And I always took that to heart because, as someone that was like doing the broadcast and things like that, like I would never know how to mix a show or do a broadcast audio mix, but I wanted to know enough where I could actually like talk to our audio engineer and be like, okay, I might not be able to tell you exactly how to do this, but I can communicate to you in a way that makes sense. And I think that, from a communication standpoint, I think wherever you are in production, I feel like that's super helpful. Yep. Because you're going to be able to really be able to communicate a lot what David said even too. How can you say what you want to say with like the least amount of words? But those words have to be the right words in order to actually, bring about the product that you're trying to bring about. Right. So
and if it's confusing or if it doesn't make sense, it's gonna waste time for one thing, but it's also just gonna be confusing and not gonna end in the result that you want.
Yeah, it'll impact your production in a negative way. So anyways, that is it for us. Thank you again for watching, listening, and subscribing, because we know you guys are doing that. This show really is meant to help you guys, help you all in the production field really feel loved, seen, appreciated, because we know a lot of times it doesn't always happen. And, the shadows can sometimes be a lonely place, but we're doing our best to make that not so.
And we're excited for episode 5, right?
We are.
What's episode 5? Do we know yet?
Not saying a word. Not saying a word. See you on episode 5.
See you next time.
Thank you.